Express now.
Good afternoon. To begin with, could you give us any indication as to why the numbers, the infection rates appear to have jumped up so quickly in the Midlands and the North East and Yorkshire? Also, a question for Michael Gove. On the help for people, the self-employed in particular, is there any possibility that this could be reviewed, given that people who have company directorships who often don't get much money from those company directorships are now blocked from having any of that help? And finally, in terms of exit strategy, and sorry to use that term, Professor Paris, but do you have an infection rate in mind as to when the lockdown measures, social distancing measures may be scaled back?
Thank you, David. I'll take the second question and hand the first and the third over to Steve. The package that we put in place in order to support the self-employed and also to support workers in the economy overall has been designed in order to help those principally on lower incomes, in order to help them through a difficult time. It's been designed specifically targeted in order to do that. But as we've seen in the course of this week, the Treasury are keeping these schemes under review and are doing everything they can, working with the banks and others, in order to help support viable businesses, to keep people in employment, and to put the government's hands around every working person. So if there are specific examples of inefficiencies in the way in which the business support scheme or support for the self-employed is operating, then I know that the Treasury will want to look at them in order to make sure that support is targeted as effectively as possible. But I'll hand over to Steve on the question about the regional spread and also about how we manage our way out of the current situation.
So on the geographical variation, I think it's difficult to give a particular explanation as to why any particular part of the country has a higher rate at any one time. I would say that perhaps, not unsurprisingly, London as a major urban centre has an infection rate which is maybe a week or so ahead of the rest of the country. But for instance, if you look at a normal winter and look at the spread of flu in a normal winter, it's not unusual to see flu rates in the winter pop up in one area of the country before they rise in another area. So that geographical variation is actually to be expected. Although, as I say, it's difficult to get under the skin of why one particular area versus another might have a higher rate at any particular time. So not unexpected. On the infection rate per se, no, I don't have a particular figure for infection rate. And I think it allows me to highlight one of the bits of scientific information, one of the pieces of the jigsaw that I've been talking about earlier, that we don't know about yet, but which will help us when we develop strategies going forward. So we are still not clear how many people might have had this virus but have not developed symptoms. That is work that's going on internationally, and in fact it's work that's going on in this country as I speak to try and understand what that figure is. When that information becomes available, when that scientific knowledge is known with large numbers of people, that will help us not only in our strategy going forward, but in our understanding of infection rates per se.
Thanks very much. Is there anything you just wanted clarity on there, David?
Just very quickly then, are you putting more weight on infection rates or hospital admissions in terms of your strategy going forward?
Well, I think the strategy has been quite clear, and it continues to be the strategy. The strategy is to save lives, to protect the NHS. Save lives because clearly we wish to save lives. As a doctor, that's why I went into medicine. Of course, we need to save lives. But putting less pressure on the NHS is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, as I've said before, our strategy is to build capacity in the NHS. So at the same time as we are reducing the spread of the virus by the measures that the government have put in place and that we all must follow, so reducing demand, we have worked hard to make sure that we're ahead of the curve and we have increased capacity. And you've heard about the Nightingale Hospital and more Nightingale hospitals today. So we still have capacity within the NHS, even in London. We are ahead of this surge. And I think that's down to the huge efforts that the NHS has put in. So going forward, the strategy will need to be to continue to make sure that the NHS can cope with this and that we save lives. So those are the two pillars of the strategy going forward.
Thank you. And we'll turn now to Michael Savage from The Observer. Mike.
Thank you. First to the Secretary of State. On